This podcast is sponsored by the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber is a catalyst for growth and prosperity and is here to protect and promote business, inspire innovation, cultivate communities, and influence action. Learn more at fmwfchamber.com.
Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to the Inforum Business Beat podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Avanella. Let's get things started. A Fergus Falls woman is hoping her new greeting cards can play a role in preventing suicide. Tammy Swift reported on Lori Carlson, the woman behind the new venture. Lori's daughter took her own life in 2014. Her daughter's death prompted Lori to start the Hope Greeting Card Project. Lori has teamed up with Minneapolis-based artist Marva Sheriff to design the cards, which contain words of encouragement. Carlson has come to find one note can make all the difference in the world to those contemplating suicide. For more on Carlson's project, visit glimmersofhope22.com. Steve M. Shields, CEO of sporting goods retailer Shields, is set to retire in January 2024. Shields' retirement was announced via press release Monday, August 15th. His retirement will bring a close to a 35-year tenure with the company. During Shields' time in the family business, he witnessed the company grow beyond North Dakota. Shields now has 30 stores in 13 states, with others in development in Arizona and Idaho. Chef Judd Eskildon has finally gotten his chance to run his own restaurant, with the Backyard Grilling Company now open inside the Moorhead American Legion. The Backyard Grilling Company opened Tuesday, August 16th. Its menu features typical barbecue staples like chicken wings, sandwiches, and burnt ends. Lunch is served from 11:30 a.m. to 2 p.m. Tuesday through Friday. Dinner is served from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Already billing itself as North Dakota's largest candy store, Sweet Dreams Confections in Fargo is about to get even bigger. Sweet Dreams owner Lee Pasica told the forum that he intends to expand the candy shop just in time for the holiday season. Sweet Dreams will grow into the adjacent retail space, adding 2,400 square feet to the shop. More room means more sweet treats for shoppers, Pasica said. He hopes to debut the expanded shop in October. Unemployment in Minnesota stayed at its record low mark of 1.8% in July, Minnesota correspondent Alex DeRozier reported Thursday. That figure puts Minnesota well below the national mark of 3.5%. Additionally, Minnesota added 19,100 new jobs in July. The leisure and hospitality industry led the state's job growth, adding 6,700 new jobs.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chad Kuhl, host of the Northland Outdoors podcast. Hey, here in the Northland, we love our time outside. And on the Northland Outdoors podcast, we're going to talk about all of it. Not just fishing, not just hunting, but mountain biking, camping, rock climbing, bird watching, you name it. We're going to have it on the Northland Outdoors podcast. New episodes every 2 weeks on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. So look for it and join us on the Northland Outdoors podcast.
For a lot of people, myself included, air travel has always felt like a bit of a chore. Ever since the COVID-19 pandemic started over 2 years ago, however, flying has become an even more tedious endeavor. All in all, there's a lot for travelers to keep in mind nowadays. Here to break down what you need to know for your next flight is Kyle Potter, executive editor of the Thrifty Traveler. Kyle, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And just to set the background, paint a picture here, if you will, my colleague Helmut Schmidt put together a story this past week on some of the travel woes that local residents have experienced. One family was traveling for a destination wedding in New York City. Flight delays wound up costing them nearly $5,000 in terms of lost Airbnb nights, lost attraction tickets, and other costs. Another woman had her bag stuck behind in Europe for a month. When she got it back, it was completely soaked. The bottom line is, if you're traveling soon and you haven't read Helmut's story, you really ought to. But Kyle, just to go to you here, how common are these kind of stories nowadays?
Let's start with some good news, because there has been a lot of bad news when it comes to air travel for the last, 6+ months. The good news is, and I would knock on wood if I could, that it seems like the worst of the worst is behind us. Basically from, March all the way into the start of summer, definitely through Memorial Day weekend and into June as well. It was about as bad as it gets. And stories like these were way too common. These stories are, definitely pretty shocking and horrible, and at one far end of the spectrum for just how bad things could get when things do go wrong. But the fact of the matter was that delays and cancellations, lost bags in the United States and definitely over in Europe became a major problem and turned a lot of people off of air travel this summer. Now, in the last couple of weeks in particular, it feels like things have started to turn around. The mass delays where, there's a storm in Atlanta or Washington, D.C., and it throws the entire nation out of whack for an airline's operation. We haven't seen nearly as much of that in the last few weeks as we did earlier this summer. I really hope that that's going to continue, but I definitely also wouldn't promise anyone that it's going to be smooth flying from here on out, because if we've learned anything from the last several months in the airline industry, it's that it's only a matter of time until things go wrong again. And then the question is just how bad do things get the next time?
And look, I mean, we all know by now that COVID is kind of what sparked all of this, but what are the specific challenges that airlines and passengers seem to be facing nowadays?
At the end of the day, it's really just a numbers game when it comes to staffing. So if you go back to March 2020, when the pandemic first hit, travel fell off a cliff. We went in the United States from 2.5 plus million Americans traveling every single day by plane to less than 90,000 a day. And it took a long time for things to get anywhere close to normal. In fact, we're still not back to normal. But when travel disappeared that way, airlines needed to get really small, really fast. And so they did this primarily through, some early retirement incentives and buyout packages. Every single airline in the country winnowed their ranks by thousands of employees. And that was really, really good for a while until travel started to come back. And now we're at the point where you throw in, the tight labor markets where unemployment in many places in the country is at historic lows. And the fact that, there have always been these problems that have faced the airline industry in good times and bad, with air traffic control issues and labor concerns and bad weather, which happens all the time. Airlines just are not big enough anymore to have the wiggle room to get through when things go wrong. And so when things fall apart, they fall apart really, really fast. Now, part of the reason I hope and think why, I'm hopeful for the first time in many months that the worst of the worst is behind us is that, at least here in the United States, airlines have bought themselves enough time, again, I hope, to staff up enough where things aren't quite so bad. And then, of course, we're basically all the way through the craziest peak summer travel season, the first normal summer of air travel in more than 2 years. And that means the travel demand starts to fall off. And that again gives airlines a little bit more wiggle room to make sure that we don't have a repeat of the embarrassing meltdowns that we saw for, more than the last year.
So really, there was kind of a moment in the Delta or United or American boardroom where all of a sudden everybody's like, wait, they're coming back. They want to fly again. And we don't have enough employees for it.
It really is almost that simple. You could say in hindsight that these airlines just cut back way too much. And, I think that in some ways is a pretty compelling argument, considering, we, the American taxpayers, bailed out the U.S. airline industry to the tune of $50+ billion in order to make sure that they were ready to fly. But, hindsight is 2020. And at the time, this time 2+ years ago in April of 2020, there was just no way to know exactly how many people they would need to let go to survive, the worst crisis in the airline industry history. So, they did cut back too much. I am hopeful that the worst of the worst is behind us, but it's also too soon to say that this is all over.
And let's kind of switch to the passenger side of this equation then. What sort of rights or protections do travelers have now?
Now, basically zero. Unfortunately, air travelers in the United States have shockingly few rights when things go wrong with flights. If an airline does delay or cancel your flight, you are not guaranteed any additional compensation. Laws like that exist in both Canada and Europe, and they do not exist here in the United States. if an airline cancels your flight and strands you, in your destination overnight, airlines aren't even legally obligated to cover the cost of your hotel. Some choose to do so, but for the most part, it is the wild, wild west in terms of what airlines really have to do. The federal government, to this point, has left it up to the airlines to decide what it means to do right by consumers when things go wrong. And the answers can be wildly different from airline to airline, but also just from agent to agent. You just have to luck out with the person that you're talking to at the gate or at the check-in counter when things do go wrong, and hope that they're willing to help you out. Really the single one ironclad rule that protects you and I is that if an airline cancels our flight or significantly delays it, we have the option to just cancel our entire trip. Just say, you know what, I'm not going to do this. And airlines have to give us a full cash refund, not just a voucher that might expire within a year, but you can actually get your money back. But aside from that, that is about it.
So you're painting sort of a bleak picture here. I mean, there's not much of a safety net for people, it sounds. But what can travelers do then to protect themselves and avoid these issues then?
There's a couple of good kind of bare minimum essentials, both in terms of things to keep in mind when you're booking your travel and additional things to make sure you have. Whether you buy a good travel insurance policy on the front end, or have a good travel credit card that has these kind of protections built in, that can be really important, as long as you read the fine print and you know exactly what you're getting, because these policies, they run the gamut. They do not do what everyone thinks they're getting when they're buying one of these policies. But, when you get stuck overnight, you can just go out on your own and buy a hotel, charge it to your plan, or get reimbursed later. And then you're not left holding the bag for some of those additional costs. When your bags get lost or don't show up for a week after you've started your trip, these types of policies and coverage can cover some of the additional costs of replacing your clothes and toiletries and all of the things you need to actually travel. So I think that's a really good place for people to start, and it's an easy one to wrap your head around. The big one, especially for travelers who are concerned about the prospect of their flight getting delayed or canceled, the number one thing that people can do is book the earliest flight possible, because the data from the federal government on these delays and cancellations is crystal clear. Every single day, from the start of the morning, basically anywhere from 6 to 9 a.m., an airline can get their first flights out of the day on and off the ground on time. But as the day wears on, these kinds of problems that we've seen over the course of the summer stack up. And planes get left out of place, and there aren't crew left over, once you get to midday to take over another flight and get this plane where it needs to go. And so the problems just start to stack up as the day stretches on. So, if you have a choice between an 8 a.m. departure and a 1 p.m. departure, picking that 8 a.m. flight, even if it means, a very early alarm, is the best choice that you can make.
So let's kind of close here on a positive note then. There's some sour news in the travel industry, that's for sure, but you feel like it's starting to improve and maybe turn a corner?
I do, and again, I do need to knock on wood for that one, because, I think we're going to continue to see pockets of the problems that we've seen over the course of the last year and change. But I think the worst of the worst is behind us, because airlines have gotten some time to train the pilots and the flight attendants that they need and get more of them on board. So their staffing is in a better position, and that's only going to continue to improve. And airlines also cut a lot of flights throughout the course of the summer and into the fall, and in some cases even into early 2023. While that isn't necessarily a good thing, it means that they're aware of the fact that they can't keep doing what they did in May and June of this year, which was just cancel flights day of and leave people stuck. So what they're trying to do, and what they've largely succeeded in doing to this point, is cut enough flights so that they give themselves the wiggle room. They're not stretching themselves so thin that they have a better chance of getting all of the flights that they are running on and off the ground on time. And that is a huge, huge silver lining for people, even though it may mean that the flight that you book today for a trip in November or December It might not look exactly the same. If you booked a noon departure, you might get moved to a 9 a.m. departure or vice versa. But it does mean that the odds of flights getting on and off the ground have improved a lot, especially compared to just a few months ago. And the final thing, I think a lot of the heartache about what happened earlier this summer in particular, it felt like a slap in the face that people were paying $600, $700, $900 for a trip to New York City or Boston or Florida or wherever, just sky high airfare, with no guarantee that they were even going to get where they need to go. And the tide has turned there too. Within the last several weeks, we at Thrifty Traveler have noticed some pretty marked decreases in airfare. So the flights that, just a couple of weeks ago, you might have looked and seen they were $800, might be more like $500 or $400 or even less. The cheap flight deals, that we really pride ourselves on finding have gotten a lot better recently. And that, in the end, is maybe one of the biggest wins for consumers after a very tough start to summer.
And that was Kyle Potter, executive editor from the Thrifty Traveler, with everything you need to know before you travel. Kyle, once again, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That concludes this week's episode of the Inforum Business Beat podcast. This has been your host, Thomas Avanella. Stay up to date around the clock by visiting inforum.com/business.
Inforum is proud to be a part of the Trust Project. To learn more about our ideals and commitment to trustworthy journalism, go to inforum.com/policies and standards.